Hello friends, welcome to my channel Financial Literacy with AV. My name is Abhijit Biswas and I am on a mission to help laymen get financially literate. To be a part of this mission, just pause this video and subscribe to my channel. Also hit the bell icon so that every time I upload a new video, you get notified. Now we'll move to this discussion. This is again a very interesting discussion. This discussion is on what is the inherent challenge in the commercial banking model, and this will help you understand what is the challenge that all Indian public sector banks are facing today. Okay, I think you all know, I do not have to tell this, they are facing the challenge of what? NPA, right? That is the bad, correct? They are facing the challenge of NPA. With this discussion, it will be clear why NPA is a problem, right? From common sense, you can understand non-performing asset, bad loan is definitely a problem, but technically you will now understand why bad loan is a very problematic for a particular commercial bank. So let us approach this in 6 different scenarios. First, we'll start with a very simple scenario, then we will add on complexities just to match the real world. Okay, so let us first go to scenario 1. This is the very simple scenario where suppose a bank takes a deposit of 100 rupees and gives away that deposit as loan. Okay, this is a very simple scenario, and this scenario is highly unrealistic because banks do not work in such a simple structure. Why? Because you cannot run your business only by borrowing. See, these deposits are what? Borrowing by the bank. You are depositing money into the bank. So for bank, these are liabilities, right? These deposits are bank's liabilities. Yes or no? These deposits are liabilities. These are all liabilities. And the loans that they give out, these are assets. I'm talking from the point of view of the bank. So you cannot have only borrowings. You need to have some of your capital, right? You all know the accounting equation. Assets are equal to what? Liabilities plus owner's equity or capital. So capital has to be there. So this is highly simplistic and highly unrealistic model. But this is the starting point. Okay, you are borrowing and you are lending, and that is the fundamental job or function that a commercial bank performs. But we have to increase complexities to this. So let us go to scenario 2 and add some complexities to match the real world. Now scenario 2, you see, this is more likely. In scenario 2, what happens? You have deposits of 100 and you have equity of 10. That means the bank has put in some equity. Now your total of your liability side becomes 110 and your loan becomes 110. So this is your asset, this is asset, this part is your asset, this part is your asset, is assets, and this is your L plus E, liabilities plus equity, or we together call them liabilities, because equity is also liability towards the owners, right? And when we simply say liabilities, we mean liability to outsiders. So here also your accounting equation holds good, right? In the liability side you have 110 and in asset side you have 110, correct? But what is the problem with this model? The problem with this model is can you borrow all the things, means the total amount of capital that you have got, can you lend the whole borrowing or whole amount of capital and liabilities? Is it possible for a bank? Bank has got total debt plus equity 110 and it has lent all 110. Is it really possible? It is not possible. Why it is not possible? Because there is something called, there is the big boss. Who is the big boss? There is RBI. RBI will say, boss, this is nothing doing. You cannot run business like this. Why you cannot run business like this? You need to have some reserves. So RBI will say that you need to have some reserves. Why you need to have reserves? Because if depositors come and ask for their money, you should have some cash to give back to them. You cannot lend the whole money, right? So that takes us to the next level. That is the next scenario. That is scenario 3. In scenario 3, you will see one more addition. What is that? Reserves. So now they have total 110. Out of that, 85 they have lent and 25 they have kept in reserves. So basically, this consists of two types of reserves. One is called, can anybody tell me what are those two types of reserves here? One is CRR, liquidity ratio, and cash reserve ratio. Then liquidity ratio means it is in cash, and so means you have to invest in short-term government security. Right? Can anybody tell me what is the current CRR, cash reserve ratio? Yes, it was 4%. Now it has been reduced to 3%, and SLR is 18.5%. 3% of what? 3% of your deposits. 18.5% of your deposits. Okay. So these are buffers. If the depositors come and ask for money, because these are very liquid assets, you can always give them back. Okay. Is this point clear? Now, what we have done, we have total 110 in our liability side, 100 deposit, 10 rupees equity, and out of that, 25 we have kept as reserved with RBI, and 85 we have. So till this point, there is no problem, and this is more, closer to the real world, right? But there might be problems if a portion of this 85 becomes bad loans. That means if a portion becomes a non-performing asset, right? And you can see, you must have heard of something called capital adequacy ratio. Have you heard of something called capital adequacy ratio? Capital adequacy ratio. Have you heard of this term, capital adequacy ratio? That means bank must have adequate capital in its balance sheet, right? So how do you calculate this ratio? Capital adequacy ratio is nothing but capital divided by risk weighted asset. RWA means risk weighted asset. What do you mean by risk weighted asset? Say, for example, in this case, we have two types of asset. One is the reserves with the RBI. I'm talking about the bank's balance sheet. For the bank, the reserve that they have kept with the RBI, these are assets, right? And the other one is loans. Now, is there any risk that the reserve that the bank has kept with the RBI will not be given back to the bank? No, because it is with the RBI, so there is no default risk. Here, there is no default risk because it is with the RBI, it is safe. There is no question of default risk. So here, the risk weight should be 0 because there is no risk. But with these loans, there is default risk, right? Because these are given to different business houses. These are given to, individual borrowers. So there is a possibility that there might be a default. So there will be a default risk. So for this, the weight will be 100%. But here, the weight will be 0%, but here it will be 100%. So 100% is basically equal to 1, right? So in this case, your risk weighted asset will be 25 into 0 plus 85 into 1, that is equal to 84. Okay. So your capital, that is your equity, is 10 and your risk weighted asset is 85. So what is the ratio? 10 divided by 85. If you have a calculator, you can calculate 10 divided by 85. It comes to 11.76%. 11.76%, right? 11.76%. And according to the Basel norm, that is Basel 3, the current norm, these are again a regulatory organization. The capital adequacy ratio should be at least 8%. So you can see at present it is higher than 8%. So there is no problem. Okay. Now we will go to a scenario where it creates a problem because of the bad loan. So let us go back to, so here I have given you a new scenario wherein you can see there is a bad loan of 5. So total out of 85, 80 you are saying good and 5 you are saying bad. Okay. So bad loan means basically what? Bad loan means basically, this is technically known as what? This is technically known as NPA, right? And this is the problem. Now, why is this a problem? Now, see, RBI says that if you have a non-performing asset, you cannot keep it in your balance sheet, right? Say, you all know debtor and bad debt concept, right? Yes or no? If a debtor becomes a bad debt, then you have to write it off from your book. It's a non-performing asset. You cannot show it as an asset in your balance sheet. You have to write it off. If you write it off, it will be a loss. If it is a loss, then it will be equity. If profit is there, it is added to equity. If there is a loss, it will be deducted from equity. So basically, if you write off this 5, this 85 will become 80, right? And this equity will become 5. Because whatever loss you incur, that will decrease your equity. You all know from accounting concepts that losses are deducted from equity and profits are added to the equity. So what will be your revised balance sheet? Your revised balance sheet will be something like this. Your deposit remains the same, 100. Your equity becomes 5 and your loan becomes 80 and reserves remains as 25. Okay. But now check, what is your capital adequacy ratio? Your capital adequacy ratio in this case, your capital adequacy ratio is, what is your capital? Capital is 5 by, what is your risk weighted asset? 25 into 0 plus 80 into 1. So this is basically what? 5 by 80. So 5 by 80, if you calculate, if you calculate how much it comes to, 6.25%. So your capital adequacy ratio has reduced from 11.76 to 6.25, and which is lesser than 8%. So as per regulation, at least 8% capital adequacy ratio you should have, right? So you have actually not complied with the regulation. And if your capital adequacy ratio falls below 8%, then what will happen? RBI will not allow you to lend further unless you restore your capital adequacy ratio to 8%. Now, how do you restore your capital adequacy ratio to 8%? You have to raise further equity, right? Unless you are able to raise further equity, you will not be allowed to lend further. This is what happened with Yes Bank. Yes Bank's capital adequacy ratio at present is less than 8%. That's why they had to go for that FPO of 15,000 crores just to make it above 8%. Okay. So if your NPA increases, it will directly eat away your equity. If your equity gets eaten away, then your capital adequacy ratio will fall. If your capital adequacy ratio falls, then you will not be able to lend. If you are not able to lend, then you are not able to grow. And that is why all public sector banks are struggling, because they have higher NPAs as compared to private sector banks. Private sector banks, say banks like HDFC and ICICI, Axis Bank, right? Their, NPAs are far lesser than the NPAs of public sector banks. So now I think you have understood, if you have higher NPAs, what is the problem it will create. And RBI wants all the NPAs to be written off. If NPAs are written off, then naturally your equity will be eaten up. If equity gets eaten up, then your capital adequacy ratio will fall. If your capital adequacy ratio falls, then you will not be able to lend. So banks are there to borrow and lend. If they are not in a position to lend, then they will not be able to grow, right? So this is the basic challenge. This is the basic problem with the Indian banking systems, specifically with the public sector banks. And what is the solution to this problem? The solution to this problem is recapitalization of the bank. Recapitalization of the banks. Okay. So in last budget, they declared 70,000 crores of recapitalization, right? Total 2 lakh crores, and in phased manner, first it will be 70,000 crores. Okay, and they are in the process of doing that. we will discuss how recapitalization works. But for now, you have understood the problem is growing NPA and solution is recapitalization, one of the solutions. Okay.